Unabashed.
The most unpredictable.
Becomes a headline.
The most volatile.
Outrageous behavior.
Unsubstantiated narratives. A battle of personalities.
Welcome to Grand Tamasha. I'm your host, Milan Vaishnav of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. We're recording on May 21st, just 2 days before Counting Day. Joining me to discuss the latest developments from India is Sunetra Chaudhary, the brand new national political editor of the Hindustan Times. Sunetra is a veteran journalist who has had a distinguished career with the Indian Express and NDTV, among others. I'm very pleased to have her on the show for the very first time. Sunetra, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Milan. Thanks for having me.
So let's jump right in. I want to start by reviewing this weekend's exit polls. On Sunday, we were inundated with 14 exit polls, 13 of which showed the NDA, or the National Democratic Alliance, winning an outright majority. 3 of these polls projected the BJP-led NDA to do as well or even better than 2014. I think just one of the 14 polls showed the NDA falling short of a majority with around 242 seats. Now that we have a sense of what the exit polls say, tell us, how do you make sense of this flood of news that we received on Sunday?
Well, you know what? I've been speaking to a lot of people in both sides, and and whether it's the BJP or the Congress or some of the regional parties as well. I think one of the things that's interesting is that from both sides, they haven't really taken things for granted. For example, this whole thing of having this NDA meeting today, that's taking place where Amit Shah is hosting this and people like Uddhav Thackeray, the Shiv Sena, which is perhaps the most difficult ally that the NDA has. They've got them there. They've got Nitish Kumars, and this huge kind of, keeping everyone happy, everyone on the same page. That's happening on the NDA side. If you look at what's happening on the other side as well, the opposition side as well, and a lot of the Congress leaders have spoken about it. In the opposition side, it's not just Chandrababu Naidu. We know for a fact that people like Sharad Pawar and others, they are reaching out to people, especially the 3 who are at the moment, they stand there. They haven't decided which way they're going to go. That is the BJD, the TRS, and also Jagan Reddy. And so these kind of negotiations are on. So yes, while the numbers are very, very unequivocal, for everybody else, it's still making sure that they have all their, in case they don't turn out as they are, and that's what the opposition really is hoping, that the numbers aren't really going to be reflective of the reality. They're hoping it's a 2004-like situation where all the exit polls had written off. They'd written off the opposition and the Congress, and they, in fact, did very, very well. So they're really hoping it's that kind of repeat as well. And that's why they're speaking to everyone else. One of the interesting things that one Congress leader told me, I thought was quite reflective. He says, you know what these do? He, of course, everyone sees conspiracies, especially all politicians. They love seeing conspiracies. And one of the things that he pointed out was that, these things, he felt that this was a huge kind of BJP conspiracy, because he said what it does is it throws off your party workers. So a lot of them who would be gearing up as poll observers or counting agents on the day of counting, they would lose their steam. And that's what they feel that the other side is hoping for. So these are interesting theories, but I think what's interesting to me is the fact that no one really has taken it for granted.
So when you look at the state-level breakdown of these exit polls, what states or what battlegrounds really jumped out to you? I mean, I'll just put it out there for me. I thought one of the most interesting things was what the exit polls are showing in the Hindi belt, that even if you leave UP aside, the exit polls suggest very little attrition for the BJP in some of those core states where they virtually swept in 2014. And while the exit polls don't predict the same level of sweep, they still show quite a dominant performance by the BJP. What do you make of the state-level exits?
I agree with you. I'm fascinated about what it shows about Rajasthan and Madhya Pradesh, but I'm also fascinated by the kind of gains that it shows BJP making in places like Bengal and Odisha. Now, Rajasthan, of course, what's interesting is when you talk about Rajasthan or Madhya Pradesh, it actually reflects what people say on the ground as well. So while Uttar Pradesh is an entirely different story, because in Uttar Pradesh, everyone kind of expected, and that I think for the BJP as well, if you speak to BJP leaders, just generally, and if you get them to be frank with you, they say that, look, it all depends on what happens in Uttar Pradesh. So Uttar Pradesh, even the exit polls were divided that the Gathbandhan, the Grand Alliance, is going to do very well, and they are going to eat into the BJP's tally from last time on. But I think what's fascinating about Rajasthan is, for me as a reporter and as a journalist, is that it really shows that things have been completely different, that people are voting completely differently than they did in the assembly election. So in assembly election, we saw a huge kind of anti-incumbency, and it's not just a exit poll thing. This is the reality on the ground as well. I've been speaking to people there, people from the Congress, and they admit huge factor about Modi is dominating the Rajasthan election, which was not there. So while they've really differentiated between their issues in December, which is when the assembly polls happen, and their kind of big issue right now. And it isn't even, and unlike the rest of the country, it isn't even about Balakot or airstrikes or that kind of a nationalism fervor. It's just, and nobody can understand it. They're all like, it's a huge Modi wave that they're seeing in Rajasthan, and to some extent in the urban areas in Madhya Pradesh as well. That's what the local leaders are saying. In fact, one Congress leader was telling me, look, I could have fought against, and this is from Madhya Pradesh, he said, I could have fought against my candidate who's fighting from the BJP, but how can I fight against Modi? And to me, it seems like my opponent isn't this BJP candidate, but it's actually Narendra Modi. So for me, the exit polls actually reflected what exactly in these two states, it reflects exactly what people on the ground are saying, and that's fascinating.
Now, you've seen your fair share of national elections over the years, but, what in your view kind of distinguishes the 2019 campaign from elections in the past? I mean, could you pick out any specific themes or milestones that sort of struck you over the course of the past 7 weeks?
Well, there are a couple of things which I think really distinguish the 2019 elections. One, this same thing about, it all being about Prime Minister Modi. I don't think that we've had, to such an extent and to such a degree, an election where people are voting just about Narendra Modi. It's this time, Atal Bihari Vajpayee in 2004 was a very popular prime minister. However, the vote wasn't about him. The vote was about, is India shining or not? That's what the vote was about. This time, I think what really differentiates 2019 is, Phir Ek Baar Modi Sarkar. It's all about Narendra Modi. They're seeking votes, and the opposition is also attacking the government. It's all about Prime Minister Modi. So that is one huge differentiating factor about 2019. The other thing, which, of course, it has now got enough mileage and it's been talked about as well, if you think about a first, is the fact that, the kind of candidates that we've had, and the fact that we've had for the first time a terror accused as a candidate. I'm, of course, talking about Sadhvi Pragya, who is the BJP's candidate in Madhya Pradesh, in Bhopal. What's fascinating about that is that it's constantly been a story. I mean, apart from the kind of outrage from the civil society, what's interesting is at the last minute, and I think that it was some kind of a signal that Prime Minister Modi was giving to potential allies again, where at the last minute, after the voting was over, and in his last press conference, well, it wasn't a press conference, but when he was present and at the press conference and speaking to reporters, and before that in an interview, he talked about the fact that I don't think I'll ever be able to forgive Sadhvi Pragya for making disparaging comments about Mahatma Gandhi. So it's really interesting that you've had such a divisive figure who has also faced a certain amount of backlash and a pushback from her own party as well. And even though the whole idea of fielding her was something that came right from the top of the leadership of the BJP, at the end of the campaign, they kind of distanced themselves from her, so that in the end, if somebody like Nitish Kumar or anybody else who they may be wooing as a potential ally, in case they need to, although the exit poll numbers suggest they don't, then they can say that, look, yes, she was problematic, but Narendra Modi's already said that he's distanced himself from her. So it's interesting to have such a divisive kind of candidate. We haven't really had that. And I think the last aspect of how 2019 elections are completely different, I think, would be the Election Commission's own kind of role that it's played in this election. I don't think ever before has the EC been questioned so much, whether it is about EVMs, whether it is about the fact that there's now an open fight going on about one of the ECs, one of the poll body members, not agreeing with everybody else's decisions. So it really puts a huge question mark. I mean, we had a former president, Pranab Mukherjee, he's today issued a statement saying, I'm worried about these reports of EVMs coming out. He's issued a public statement, and it's very, very rare for Pranab Mukherjee to do that. So I think this, again, 2019 will also be known to be an election where the EC is not really above board.
So I want to end this session like we do every week by asking you to share with our listeners, one story coming out of India that you think hasn't been adequately reported to, but that we need to pay attention to. What would be on your list?
Well, I would say one story that I find quite fascinating is what's happening with Nitish Kumar. I think that we've all played down Nitish Kumar's statements, but I find it fascinating because Nitish Kumar, just in the middle of the election season, when he was out campaigning with Prime Minister Modi, and we know Nitish Kumar's background, he used to be on the other side. He's changed teams several times. He was with the RJD, the UPA, and now he's, of course, with the NDA. But he began the season, the election campaign, when the Prime Minister was enthusiastically singing the nationalistic song, Vande Mataram. At that time, he refused to sing along. He sat there very, very, and it was a clear signal he was right there. Today, again, he's given a statement, talking about the fact that he finds this entire scheduling of elections problematic. The fact that it was so long and there was such a gap between each phases, he finds it problematic. He perhaps, by doing that, and he of course doesn't blame the EC or call them biased, but by doing that, he perhaps becomes the only leader within the NDA who's raising questions about the elections process by the EC. So I think that's fascinating. I think that's something, especially if there's a fractured verdict, we should really look out for.
So my vote this week is a story that appeared in your paper by Snigdha Poonam and Leena Dankar, which is just an extraordinary story. Essentially, it boils down to a Haryana-based gang identified terminal cancer patients who came from poor backgrounds, got them to buy insurance plans by hiding their condition, waited for them to die, and then put their dead bodies through fake accidents. And the gang then kept a part of this insurance money and distributed the rest amongst all the various people who colluded with them. So everyone from the family members of the cancer patients to the police officers to the doctors to the insurance agents, even to the public prosecutors. I mean, this is a story that has to be read to be believed. And kudos to HT and to Snigdha and Leena for digging this story out. Who do you think had the best week in India this week, Sunetra?
I think the BJP had the best week in India because of the exit polls, the fact that things have just been working out pretty well for them. I think the lucky run started when, they had the UN enlist Maulana Masood Azhar as a terrorist. And so it's really been worked out, the timing, and that's what they say about Narendra Modi, that he's incredibly lucky. And this is perhaps an instance of that, of him having a lucky run.
So my vote would go to the voters of India. The Election Commission has provisionally said that the final voter turnout in 2019 was 67.1%, which does one better on the 2014 benchmark. While we're still waiting the final tally, it seems from the data we have thus far that the turnout levels of men and women are roughly equal, and if that comes to pass, it'll be the first time in independent Indian history that that's true. And so kudos to the voters for coming out to the polls. While many democracies are seeing flagging turnout, including the one I'm sitting in right now, the United States, this is quite an accomplishment. So from the good to the bad, who do you think had the worst week in India?
I think Congress candidates in Uttar Pradesh are having a really bad week. Things haven't been good for them for a long time now. They thought Priyanka Gandhi was going to change their fortunes by campaigning for them, but they're not looking. Even before the exit polls have completely written them off. Many are in fact saying that Rahul Gandhi's Amethi seat is in trouble as well. But I think they've been very clear that they don't have any chance of winning at all, and I think that's just really, really depressed most of them, because they were hoping for a bit of a revival. They were hoping that they were going to cut into the votes of the BJP, but it doesn't seem that it has worked at all. If things turn out to be good, it's going to be good for the Mahagathbandhan, but not for the Congress party. And after all, you've had people like Yogendra Yadav said that the Congress needs to die.
So my vote for the worst week is the father of the nation, Mahatma Gandhi. This year we're celebrating the 150th anniversary of his birth. His name, as you mentioned before, has been dragged through the mud in recent days. You know, the controversy began when the BJP's candidate for Bhopal, Pragya Singh Thakur, came out with praise for Gandhi's assassin, Nathuram Godse. Although the BJP later condemned her statement, she refused to apologize, and many BJP supporters, especially on social media, loudly echoed her praise for Godse. And so, although he's not here to defend himself, I think Gandhi's name and legacy were certainly attacked this week. Sunetra, thanks so much for joining us. I know this is an extremely busy time for you. We look forward to your reporting on Election Day and helping all of us understand what actually happened over these past 7 weeks. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks, Manan. Thanks for having me.
So after a quick break, I'll be back to talk with Gilles Verniers of Ashoka University on what data has taught us about the 2019 campaign. My guest on the podcast today is Gilles Verniers. Gilles is an assistant professor of political science at Ashoka University and co-director of the Trivedi Center for Political Data. Under Gilles' leadership, the Trivedi Center has quickly become the go-to source on Indian election data and analysis. If you have not been following the work Gilles and his colleagues have been doing on the 2019 race, then you've been missing out on some of the most informative, empirical, and timely analysis that's out there. It's great to have him in the Grand Tamasha studio. Gilles, thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, pleasure to be here.
So before we get started to talk about the campaign itself, tell our listeners a little bit about what the Trivedi Center is and describe, some of the resources you've set up for the public to use.
Yeah, so the Trivedi Center was started about 3 years ago with the aim of building public data sets on Indian elections. People who've worked on Indian elections or Indian politics at large, you, me, and so many of our colleagues, have always, struggled to put even the most basic data together. And when I joined Ashoka, I basically had the opportunity of building a research facility that would create those data sets and disseminate them through an open data platform. So we have data on election results, historical data back to nearly independence. We collect data also on candidates running for elections. So far, you needed to wait a lot, or limited means meant that you could only work on winners. But now we have data on thousands and thousands of candidates, which are collected through archival work, interviews, field work, data mining, using a multiplicity of sources, and combining computer science, political science together to create those public goods. One of our mission also is to encourage data journalism. And so we've been working with a number of publications, with the Hindustan Times, with the Times, with the Indian Express, with Scroll, and a number of other media, and NDTV also more recently, to encourage them to use more data and evidence in their coverage of elections. And it's been really heartening to see that we've been part of a movement where so much more evidence and data is being made available in real time. If you remember, the 2014 elections, I mean, we had to wait, weeks and to actually see the first, data-driven pieces, because, we would all wait for the election commission to put, stuff online, and we had, limited means, but now we can work in absolutely real time.
So one of the issues you've been tracking from day one of this election is the status of women candidates. Now, we're ending the near of the election cycle. We have one more phase to go on May 19th, which will be phase 7, of course, counting days on May 23rd. What do the numbers look like thus far in terms of women candidates? Do we see a significant shift, say, from 2014?
So there's been a very, very mild progression, and it's a mild way of putting it. So out of 8,048 candidates, 713 are women. It's basically a total of 8.8%. It's a 1.2% progression compared to 2014. And it's been a long-term trend that women participation in the election has risen in India, but from an extremely low level and with an extremely slow growth rate. To put things in perspective, when you look at women representation in national parliaments, and if you look at World Bank data on that, India ranks 152nd. A few months later, it was 149. It has slipped 3 ranks since. If you look at India's neighbors, Pakistan is 91st, Bangladesh is 90th, Nepal is 54th, Afghanistan is in the same ballpark. Only Sri Lanka actually does worse, with only 5% of women in this parliament. That figure is 11% in India. There was a lot of hope that parties would give more tickets for women for a number of important reasons, which is that women voters have really risen in India over the past few years. Traditionally, there has been a gap of participation in elections between 20-15%, which was resolving but very slowly. But after 2009, women participation has shot up to the point that where it is indifferentiated with male participation.
So in other words, just to clarify for our listeners, it's quite possible in 2019 that male and female turnout will have reached parity.
So right now, the data we have for the 6 first phases is the gap is 0.3%, which is really insignificant. In the last round of state elections, women have outvoted men in 17 states, which is a majority of states. Now, when I say outvoting, I don't mean that more women vote than men, because you still have, skewed sex ratio, and there's still gaps in registration. Pranay Roy has written about that, and Shamika Ravi has written also about that, about, missing women in the electorate. But things have improved a lot. And political parties have integrated that fact. They've included far more, clauses concerning women's interests in their manifesto. They address themselves to women much more directly than they were before. They no longer consider women as extension of, their households in terms of electoral behavior. We have data that shows that women vote much more autonomously than they probably used to in the past. India has this also very contrasted figure in terms of women participation in public life, because at the local level, thanks to quotas, you have 46% of women in elected local bodies. You have a number of very powerful women politicians, currently and historically leading parties, former prime minister, party presidents, chief ministers, and so forth. But it's this in between, in the national and particularly even more at the state parliaments, where women are missing.
Let me ask you about 2 particular parties which have gotten a lot of attention. So one is the BJD, the ruling party in the state of Odisha, and the second is the Trinamool Congress, the ruling party in the state of West Bengal. they had committed before the elections to give 1/3 of tickets to women. Have they implemented this decision? And do you think it's putting pressure on other parties, maybe not this election, but in subsequent elections, to follow suit?
Yes, they have. And to be fair, there's another party. It's a smaller, recent young party in Tamil Nadu called NTK, who has distributed 50%
Wow.
of its tickets to women. And but the BJD, the Biju Janata Dal in Orissa, and the Trinamool Congress have indeed implemented their promise. A third of the candidates for the BJD and 41% for the Trinamool. These are two parties with leaders who actually have, progressive ideas on and who are serious about, gender equity. These are also two political leaders who seek to who the women vote by, using that instrument, by providing representation. In a way, women voters are treated the way, caste voters are treated on the basis of caste or community, and so forth. Sadly, they haven't been followed by other parties. The Congress parties, the BJP, are merely giving 12% of their tickets to women. It's actually less for the Congress, slightly more for the BJP, but you don't see that having ripple effects so far. Every party so far has committed to implement the Women Reservation Bill, which would introduce a 1/3 quota in parliaments. But whether they will actually commit to that after the election remains to be
And
seen.
usually the fight then breaks down over, will there be within the 1/3 quota for women subcaste quotas for Dalits, OBCs, and others. I want to switch gears a little bit by talking about a recent piece that you did for the Hindustan Times, where you note that only 60% of incumbent MPs are rerunning this election, which, if you're sitting here in the United States, is kind of a shocking figure, right? Because we know that there's such a great incumbency advantage, and you often see incumbents rerunning. This is the lowest share you point out in at least the last 5 election cycles. Why are we seeing so few incumbents run this time?
There's a combination of factors. First, it's a common phenomenon that parties actually check out a large part of their incumbents before an election. They usually claim to do that on the basis of performance, but actually it's usually based on political electoral calculations.
Meaning that if you dump a large set of your incumbents, you can beat anti-incumbency, right?
Yeah.
Is that the idea?
Exactly. The idea is to anticipate anti-incumbency by presenting fresh faces to voters. There is a tendency from voters to turn against whoever they have, voted for in the previous election. If you look at the recent election in Madhya Pradesh, for example, most of the incumbent BJP candidates lost, and it was interpreted as, farmers' anger, rural distress, strong anti-incumbency against the state government, scandals. But most of the Congress incumbents also lost, right? And so parties try to anticipate that by putting up fresh faces. But then there's a multiplicity of other reasons that also intervene. Alliances, seat sharing, you have to let some of your seat go. Intra-party factionalism. The competition for access to position of power is fiercer than the electoral competition itself. The rising cost of entry to politics, something you have extensively written about, Milan, means also that a lot of candidates just cannot keep up. I have interviews with people who've been 5 times MPs or 5 times MLAs and say, I'm not going to sell my house to remain a politician. I cannot keep up with the mounting costs. And so this spiraling cost of entry into politics also kicks out. But I have a more recent piece, which is yet to be published, where I see that those who are chucked out tend to be first-time MPs. And those who get to rerun tend to be people who've already served 2-3 times. And so one effect of this high turnover is it actually reinforces a phenomenon of concentration of power within parties. Because you could interpret it in 2 broad ways. One, you could say it's great to have elite renewal. Think about, people in modern democracies who have, inflicted, the same old political elites for so long. I mean, look at all those, old faces, in parliaments and Congress and Senates across the world. So renewal is good and good for democracy. On the other hand, one has to see that it reinforces concentration of power by creating or reinforcing the creation of a very small, what I call a stable political class. If you look at the number in any assembly in India, across states and in the parliament, who have served more than 2 consecutive terms. These are, for me, the real professional politicians, not the fly-by-night politicians. It boils down to 100 individuals across states. In Uttar Pradesh, a state of 200 million people, you find a handful of people who actually last in politics.
Now, one thing you point out in your piece is that, one unintended consequence of weeding out all of these incumbents, even if they end up coming back later, is that you could lose out on experience, right? So is this one of the downsides of parties dropping so many incumbents? Is that the kind of institutional knowledge you have about, say, how Parliament works, the things that MPs have to do to survive and deal with constituents and the administration and so on? Does some of that go by the wayside?
Yeah, there are 2 aspects to that question. One is that you have to deal after every election with an assembly of newcomers. So they have to learn the job, and it takes time to learn how to become a parliamentarian, learning the ropes. These are not people trained, to legislative affairs or legislative work. And the second aspect is that it creates a regime of disciplining of parliamentarians who would completely refrain from raising a contradictory voice within their own party for fear of not being given a ticket. So it's the old Jack Welch rule that you weed out 10% of your least productive employees to keep the other 90% in check. But Indian political parties, let's raise the bar to 50% or 60 or 40% right now.
So Jack Welch on steroids.
Jack Welch on steroids, exactly.
I have to ask you about Uttar Pradesh, Gilles, because it's a state that you know so well. You've extensively researched backward politics, particularly in UP and the Samajwadi Party. What feedback are you getting and is your team getting from the field in terms of how the SP and the BSP, are working together in this grand alliance? I mean, we have to remind listeners that these are 2 parties that were literally at each other's throats for decades, who have decided to temporarily perhaps set aside their differences to challenge the BJP and prevent the BJP from coming back to power. What's the sense that you're getting from the field in terms of how this is working?
See, the problem in answering that question is that there's not one feedback. There are, 20 different feedbacks.
And presumably it varies by region as well.
And it varies by locality. You could literally, and we've been joking with friends who are on the ground, that you could literally send 2 reporters in one village and they will write 2 radically opposed stories at the end of the day about, who's winning. So it's been very hard to read. This is the first election in UP in a very long time that is actually a bipolar election. Where you have 2 main contenders. Before it was basically, 3-4 main parties, a 3-4 corner fight. So that changes things certainly. The alliance on paper is actually quite formidable because these are 2 parties that have a strong following among important dominant groups or groups that have numerical importance, which obviously matters a lot. And the combination of those vote bases, Muslims and Yadavs and Jatav Dalits, puts them at similar level than previous BJP vote shares. Now there's a multiplicity of factors that intervene, which could actually put a lot of grains of sand, in that machinery. The fact that the Congress is not running with that alliance, they're going to undercut, they're going to undermine them into a large number of seats. I estimate that the Congress can have a nuisance effect in 19 seats out of 80, 10 seats against the BJP. Small factions, dissident factions from the Samajwadi Party is fielding, led by Shivpal Singh, is fielding a lot of local MLAs, ex-MPs, who could dent also into the alliance. The fact that the project of this alliance is to combine 3 specific groups, it incurs the risk of alienating the 60% of the population who does not belong to any of those 3 groups. And right now, a great achievement that they have managed to do is to put their organizations together at the local level. There was a lot of doubt that they would actually do that, but we've seen them mobilizing, holding local events jointly. But the purpose of that mobilization is to make sure that the bases of those parties vote in the proper way on election day. But it's not carrying out a strong message outside. And UP, like many other states, has a lot of voters who are non-aligned. We would call them floating voters. We would call them undecided voters elsewhere. And it's not certain that the alliance will be very attractive for those, while on the other side, the BJP also has its own caste calculations, but they have the Modi factor on top of that. And everyone who's been traveling to UP recently can see how largely intact, the reputation or the image, rather, of Prime Minister Modi remains, despite the fact that people are fully aware of the limitations and the failures of his government.
Let me ask you quickly about Muslims, because there have been several commentators who said they believe the Muslims will vote strategically in this election against the BJP and support the alliance, and that they are not necessarily worried that the Congress or other parties will cut into that vote. But historically, at least research has shown that Muslims have not always coordinated on their vote in Uttar Pradesh in terms of deciding who to vote for. Where do you come down on this issue? I mean, do you think that we will see a considerable amount of quote-unquote block voting, or do things tend to be more fragmented?
Yeah, I think, first of all, I mean, it's a fiction that we need to dispel that Muslims in India vote en bloc, even within the state of Uttar Pradesh. It's in a massively heterogeneous set of communities who have been voting in a fragmented order for a very long time. Now, in a way, the good news is that they used to split their votes between SP and BSP candidates. Now that these two parties are together, that considerably reduces the risk of split voting. I have a paper with Oliver Heath and Sanjay Kumar on this precise issue, where we see that Muslims tend to vote more for co-religious candidates than any other group for co-ethnic candidates, but with the strong caveat that they would do so when they feel that that candidate has a chance of winning.
So they tend to vote more for fellow Muslims if they believe they're going to win.
Exactly. So it's not purely identity, but there's a lot of strategic voting involved. Now, with the alliance, there's a really strong chance that they would massively vote for it, and that's going to play certainly in favor of the alliance. And it's not clear that the Congress, who has fielded 8 or 9 Muslim candidates in UP, will be able to dent significantly into that. Now, you don't have Muslims everywhere. They tend to be concentrated into certain areas. In Western UP, in Rohilkhand, but very few in the east and very few in Bundelkhand, for example, and it varies across central UP. So they have demographic, therefore political influence, but only in certain subregions of the state.
So let me ask you by asking you a question about May 23rd, which is counting day, a day that, seems so far away when we started this podcast, but is now around the corner. Let's leave UP aside. Everyone knows that's going to be a big battleground state. What states are you going to be watching above all others to kind of get a handle on the trends, on which way this election is going to go? What are some of those states which you think are going to be symbolic in terms of which way the wind is blowing?
I would look at symbolic states, but I would also look at other states for also pragmatic reasons, because, the big questions after 23rd is what coalition are going to have. This is the most likely scenario. There's going to be a large coalition. So I would, of course, we expect the BJP to decline significantly, across the Hindi belt. So the question is, where can they make gains to compensate for those losses? The crucial states will be West Bengal. This is a 40-plus seat state, in the Lok Sabha. And the BJP has led a very aggressive ground campaign, has been working on it for years, and is making a lot of progress. Whether that can convert into seats remains to be seen, but the BJP has succeeded in becoming the number 2 party there, completely displacing the Congress and the communists, who have been totally invisible during this campaign. Another state I would look at closely is Tamil Nadu, because there is a strong possibility that the AADMK, who swept that state in 2014, might bite the dust. They are in complete organizational disarray. Their leader passed away. They haven't managed the succession. There's a lot of infighting. And if the DMK plus Congress should sweep that state, it's almost 35 to 40 seats that are no longer available for a BJP-led coalition at the center. I would look also at three states in the south and east, Orissa, which is another area where the BJP is hoping to make inroads, and Telangana and Andhra Pradesh, where the local regional parties are expected to sweep. They have already sort of announced that we're going to pool our seats together and negotiate en bloc, which would give them considerable leverage. And if the Trinamool decides to join that, I mean, they could decide or be decisive to the determination of the actual outcome of the election. This has not been a national election. There's one party in power that has led a national campaign with a national leader, but the regional factors, the importance of state politics has surfaced more than ever. And it's the complexity of, additions and numbers that ultimately is going to look at. But to answer your question, West Bengal is crucial. Tamil Nadu will be very important, and literally every other state. The more fragmented, the more uncertain, even small states and small parties can hope to have to play a pivotal role. Which is a polite form of, blackmail or
right. I mean, let's not forget that parties with even no MPs, but a marginal vote share, can help tip the balance in particular states, particular constituencies.
What's important is to see that there is that the opposition is in a dispersed order, which basically creates a completely open-ended scenario after the 23rd.
So, Gilles, I want to thank you for coming on the show today. It's been great to follow your work during this entire campaign. I know that you and others will be writing regularly for the Indian Express, for the Hindustan Times, for a variety of other outlets after the elections.
Correct.
And we'll look forward to reading that. And for those enterprising individuals who want to access data on the 2019 election, I think Gilles can't promise that the data will be ready for public consumption on the 24th, but it will be there shortly after for people to start playing around with.
As soon as we can.
Thanks so much.
You're welcome.
Grant Tamasha is a co-production of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace and the Hindustan Times. You can find us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget to rate and review. It helps others find the show more easily. For more information about the show and to find the writing we referenced on this week's episode, visit our website, granttamasha.com. Production assistance comes from Jamie Hinson and Rachel Osnos. Tim Martin's our audio engineer, and Lauren Dueck's our executive producer. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.